What's up, everybody? Today, I'm honored to have Christian thinker, cultural apologist, classical educator, and homeschooling mom, Annie Crawford, in the Yours Truly virtual studio. I first encountered Annie as I dipped my toe and fell back into the wild and murky pool of the digital reality of X social media platform, previously known as Twitter. In my attempts to carefully curate my following to people in this corner of the internet's network, Annie's tweets and likes continually started popping up in my feed, and at some point we gave each other a follow. I didn't realize that we had both attended Symbolic World back in February, but in Paul Vanderklay's recent conversation with Richard Rowland of Symbolic World Prominence, Richard mentioned Annie's attendance, and I thought, well, I think I'll reach out to see if she'd be open for some conversation craft here on the Yours Truly podcast. And she graciously accepted the invitation. In show prep, I found her work detailed on her website, anniecrawford.net, and was able to listen through several of her podcast appearances and look over some of her written work. She had a recent conversation with Jonathan Peugeot on the Symbolic World podcast discussing C.S. Lewis and the Ransom Trilogy, which I know has had a recent splash of interest in this corner of the corner. And in the conversation that touched on Lewis's fascinating take on gender. Annie is also a contributing writer for the Symbolic World blog. If this video is helpful, give it a like. If you want to keep up with the channel, hit subscribe. And if supporting the channel makes sense for you, consider one of 3 channel membership tiers. Channel members gain access to early podcast previews and members-only content. Top-tier members gain a voice to help build this little corner of the internet. So check them out. Membership link in the description. In 2014, Annie co-founded Vine Classical Community, where she currently teaches apologetics and humanities courses. From 2016 to 21, Annie helped develop the Faith and Culture Ministry at Christ Church Anglican of Austin. And in 21, she co-founded the Society for Women of Letters, where she currently serves as senior fellow. Annie also writes for Salvo, The Symbolic World, The Shadowlands Dispatch, and An Unexpected Journal, which she helped found in 2017. Her writing and speaking is focused on the 3 important S's in modern culture: story, sex, and science. As an undergraduate, Annie had the privilege of studying literature and philosophy with Alan Jacobs, Leland Ryken, and Arthur Holmes at Wheaton College, before finishing a Bachelor's of Science in Environmental Studies at the University of Oregon and a Certificate of Biblical Studies from Macola Bible College. She holds a Master's in Christian Apologetics from Houston Christian University, where she studied with Inkling scholars Michael Ward and Holly Ordway. It's an honor to enter into conversation with Annie today and begin a face-to-face relationality with her in this space. I look forward to seeing where this conversation leads today, and I'm glad to have you journeying alongside with us. So without any further ado, I give you Annie Crawford, Christian thinker, a cultural apologist, classical educator, and homeschooling mom. Hi, this is Christian Baxter, and you're listening to Yours Truly, a place we go to think out loud. Annie, thanks for being here today.
Hey, it's great to meet you, Christian. I'm really looking forward to talking with you more today.
Awesome. Well, to get started, I wanted to ask what makes an Annie Crawford? What set you out on this journey to focus on apologetics?
Yeah, that's a big question. I've been thinking about this as I've been doing more podcasts and conversations, realizing that, I need to be able to share my journey a little bit more. And so as I've been thinking about that story, I can't help but think, according to the lens that Lewis used in his autobiography, as you know, I'm a Lewis scholar, and C.S. Lewis really functions at the center of so much of how I think and what I do. And in his autobiography, he said it's really a story of his life as a story of longing, right? And he describes joy as that longing that we have that is so sweet itself. We'd rather have the longing than not. And I think that is I relate to that a great deal, that in my life, I can't remember a time where there wasn't this kind of longing for the beauty that is behind the mountains, the beauty that is inside the forest, the beauty that seems at the back of all things. And so, I grew up in Oregon, which very much feels like the edge of the world, the Pacific West Coast, and very much grew up at the oceans and in the forests and hiking and climbing the mountains, always drawn by this beauty that I found in creation, this desire to try to find the source of that beauty. I also had the privilege of being baptized into an Anglo-Catholic church, and so having an encounter with liturgy and religious, beautiful, rich religious symbolism very early. I was an acolyte. I carried the incense boat, and I loved the incense and all the images and beauty that I encountered in liturgy also gave me that same taste that I had in the mountains, right? That there is some kind of transcendent beauty behind all this that is rousing this desire in my heart. So being from Oregon, growing up around creation, being part of a liturgical church, and then also being fortunate enough to have a pretty good education that exposed me to literature and philosophy pretty early in life. And I also found in reading Plato and reading Jane Austen and reading C.S. Lewis and Tolkien, that same encounter with beauty that roused that same longing for, the reality that was speaking to me from behind the beauty of all these things. So very much my own life story was a quest to try and move further up, further in, to better understand, to grasp, to move closer to this source of truth and beauty. And in college, I'm going to tell you, Christian, there's a story I've been wanting to tell somebody, so I'm going to just say it now.
Perfect.
So, I thought, okay, I love philosophy. I've tasted this truth and I want more truth. And so as a 15-year-old, I thought, I'm going to go read the best philosophy that there is, right? And so I don't know how this happened. I wish I could remember, but I thought, well, who's the best philosopher? Who's going to be able to give me the truest truth, right? It just shows you how much still a modern paradigm was saturating my life. I thought to find the best philosopher that I would pick up Spinoza. Do you know who Spinoza is?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So what Spinoza did was take geometrical proofs. So the kind of methodology you use in a geometrical proof, and apply that mathematical proof method to truth in general. And so I read his Ethics, and it very much reads like a geometric proof. And so I thought, okay, who has the truest truth? Well, the person who's most rigorously applied, a rationalistic mathematical model. So I tried as a 15-year-old to read Spinoza's Ethics, and quickly found that it wasn't resonating. It actually, yeah. So that just shows you, though, as a 15-year-old, how much I was already trying to figure all of this out and trying to quest after knowledge. So, formative influences in my story, places where I tasted that longing, liturgy, creation, sort of the life of the mind. Mm-hmm. So I went off to college. I was going to study literature and philosophy, double major. Also kept up backpacking and mountaineering. But what I encountered in college was that I was really still pursuing all this on my own terms. I was the one in control of my search. I was the one in control. And that led me to the end of myself. I, make a long story short. When your life is driven by the pursuit of self, God in his grace will lead you to the end of yourself. I don't know if you've had that experience.
100%.
It's God's grace. I think it's Lamentations 3 that has been an important verse to me. in chapter 3, Jeremiah says, it was good for me that I tasted the dust when I was young, because then there's still hope, right? So that's very much my story in college, is coming to an end of myself, tasting the dust, really falling hard, so that I would be sick of myself and would learn surrender, right? Would learn surrender, not my way, right? But God's way. And I need to pursue that goodness, that truth, and that beauty that God had allowed me to taste it. I need to pursue that in obedience, in surrender to his call, and as a gift of his grace, rather than an effort that I am in control of myself. And so, by the time I graduated my undergraduate, God had helped me kind of piece those things together, and found my husband and I met on a mission trip to Nepal, actually. So we very much have a shared vision of seeking goodness and truth and beauty out in the kind of extreme landscapes, right? The Himalayas, the mountains, trying to climb that cosmic mountain, right? So we kind of found each other, quite literally, climb this cosmic mountain, move to Texas, and start our family. And that really gave me the opportunity to try to say, okay, through philosophy and liturgy, God, you've shown me this sacramental view of the world. How can we, now that we're starting our family, form our family from the beginning in that sacramental worldview, in the way that I educate my children, in the way that I continue to try and recover my own education, in the way that we form friendships in the liturgies of our home. And so that's kind of how I fell into, I think, all the work that I do as an educator, as an apologist, is unified around the effort to revive a sacramental understanding of the world and a sacramental way of living into the world. And so that's kind of what I've been doing in every way I can, educating my own kids, creating adult classes for adults, writing, speaking when I have the opportunity, trying to help people see, the goodness, truth, and the beauty that God has embedded inside of the world, how all creation is declaring his glory if we only have eyes to see again. So.
Thank you for sharing. That's a very poetic way to share that story. It felt beautiful. What were the timelines? When were you at Wheaton and when were you at Nepal?
Yeah, so Wheaton, from 95 to 98 about. Okay. And then I was at University of Oregon from 98 to 2000. And then I went to Nepal for a summer in there around 2000. Was it 99? It was 2000. Yeah, it took me 6 years to finish my undergraduate journey, because I was not just, checking off classes to get a degree. I was very much on an existential journey. So it was not a straight line story there.
I definitely squeezed 4 into 5 myself.
Did you?
But probably for different reasons. But yeah, I had some friends that did some long-term missions in Nepal, which is why I was curious, but they were there a little later. But yeah, so when did the piece of just really caring about culture and kind of, sharing, like I guess a defense for the faith, like when did that, obviously you're on an existential journey, but then at some point you turned a corner towards wanting to like turn that into kind of mission?
Yeah, that's a great question. Well, one, my mother was an artist. And so I think I grew up around a sensitivity to beauty, but also, art is about the materialization of meaning. So grew up with an attention to meaning. But in terms of the apologetics, I think that has to do with growing up a little bit on the West Coast as a Gen Xer, and kind of watching culture start to crumble around me. That's very much, I feel like for me, an experience being in Gen X in the Pacific Northwest, think of Nirvana and Soundgarden and Pearl Jam and all this grunge music that was expressing my generation's sense that things are falling apart.
Mm.
And I think, you hear a lot of stories about the Christians deconstructing lately, right? Well, I saw that in high school, in my own family. And so I think I sometimes joke that I became an apologist so my faith would survive Thanksgiving dinner.
I like it.
To put it that way. And so just in terms of this deconstruction, crumbling of faith, crumbling of culture was happening around me as I grew up. And so if my faith was going to grow and survive, I had to figure out these questions that were being thrown at me, often from the people that I knew and loved most. So I think that's what spurred me to dig into apologetics, and very much, reading Mere Christianity in high school was formative. Discovering Lewis and his ability to make truth so vivid and clear was influential to me early on.
So I told you this, before I got started, I said, I think I'm going to jump in to the deep end right at the beginning after we talk about your story, so we kind of find ourselves like in a cultural moment, a cultural apologetic moment at the time of this recording, which this may or may not come out this week, but the controversy about the opening Olympic ceremony in Paris with the Last Supper / Dionysus, trans identity symbol, all these things, and on the online spaces, I see people from different parts of Christian thinking coming at this, so clearly from two different spaces. So how does that make sense to you? You getting connected to symbolic world, seeing the life sacramentally, that there's a symbol that was raised up at one of the most symbolic events of the world, of the world culture, having this very intense reaction. Kind of what's been your initial experience with that?
Yeah, it's a great question. And this is a very interesting moment. And you're right that responses are all over the place. And so I think the best way to have a fruitful conversation about the opening ceremonies of the Olympics is to step back and first, understand what the Olympics are for, how art works, define some terms, right? So in other words, let's look at the telos, look at the purposes, right? So I was re-listening to recently Jonathan Pajot. He did that talk on fairy tales. It was a great talk. And at the beginning, he talks about how, what we're wrestling with in our culture is the tension between unity and diversity.
Mm-hmm.
We're celebrating diversity, okay, but if we're not going to just disintegrate and fragment into a chaos, what is the point of unity? What is actually holding us together? And that unity is formed by purpose, right? Okay, so if we're going to understand the Olympics, what is the purpose? What is the purpose that gathers the world together in a kind of unity, right? Okay, and then to understand, once we understand that purpose, then to look at, well, what's then the purpose of the opening ceremonies and how well did it fulfill that purpose, right? So when I think about the purpose of the Olympics, there is a celebration of human excellence. I mean, what are we going there to do? We're going there to see runners run fast and gymnasts, do incredible things. So to take a God-given human capacity to run, to move, and to see that capacity developed to its utmost height of excellence, right? that is, as I would understand it, what the Olympics are about. And the whole world gathers every 4 years to see and celebrate human excellence, and also human virtue, right? Because to be an excellent athlete requires courage, discipline, fortitude, prudence, right? So it's a celebration not only of physical power or physical excellence, but also, virtues, sportsmanship. There's objective standards involved in that. That we're not going to cheat on the timing. That we're going to have a fair and objective measurement of the swimmer's speeds. Okay, so it's this worldwide celebration of virtue, of human virtue. Okay, well then what would be the purpose of the opening ceremony? And I think, now that I look back and think about different ceremonies, I've been kind of comparing them and realizing that the meaning and purpose of the opening ceremonies for the Olympics has been a little bit ambiguous for a while, right? I don't know if you remember watching the Olympics that were in Russia.
Not off the top of my head, no.
And yeah, I remember people talking about at that time how much Russian propaganda there was, right? A kind of rewriting of Soviet history in order to gloss over some of those troubling spots. And so there was a bit of nationalistic propaganda to the opening ceremonies of the Olympics, I believe in Sochi. So if the Olympics are about gathering the world together and welcoming the whole world together to celebrate basic human excellence, then isn't that what the opening ceremonies ought to do through what the art is symbolizing? And I think it's in that context then that we can better understand why people are upset with, concerned, unhappy with how the opening ceremonies, what they did and what they seem to symbolize, because context matters, right? So if this is just an installation piece in some room in a museum in Berlin, okay, well, the purpose of an art installation in Berlin is a different context than the central event that's going to open and visualize the purpose for which the whole world has gathered. I'm just gonna pause, see if you have a thought there.
I mean, yeah, I think that is a great way to contextualize what we're seeing, and so the question that you were kind of pointing at and posing is this a unifying symbol? And I think that the answer to that is no, culturally. Not that certain people don't feel seen or whatever, but culture at large. The person that stuck out to me that's had the most high profile response in this side of the corner is Bishop Barron. He said, and that really struck me, because a lot of times there are things culturally that we nuance, and he was just not gonna go. I mean, he was direct. He's a very winsome, and he doesn't ever sound angry in how he's talking or anything. But it was interesting, and I think that there's the, who knows, I don't want to get into the weeds of what is going on versus just looking at it, of what it looks like. And I know that there's a version that says that it's representing some Dionysius meal, and then you put it up, and you're just a rube if you think that this is, is representing the classic, Lord's Supper painting and all that kind of things. And so regardless of intent, the response speaks for itself.
Yeah.
And people maybe see what they want to see, but that's also the fact that so many people see something one way or the other way, I mean, that just speaks to something in that to your point about unity, and as a result, it being on some kind of fulcrum, people are falling off one side or the other. And that if you were going to choose an image to try to unify people, that was probably not the one to do it.
Right. So that's the first issue, I feel like, is what's the purpose of the opening ceremony and the Olympics? And it is the only thing our world has that we actually celebrate together. Nobody cares about the UN. You know, ordinary people don't follow the UN. The Olympics is really the thing that is at the height of global unity.
Yeah.
And so in this context, at this height of global unity in the opening ceremonies, you ought to, you know, art in that. This is a festival. This is the celebration that for us sits atop of our global community.
Yeah.
Right. And what have they lifted up to that highest place of global unity? They've lifted up a death work. And, you know, that term might need a little bit of unpacking. Okay.
Sure.
So the purpose of art in this context would be to lift up that which unifies the globe. Okay. So let's look at what they have lifted up. And I, you know, if you want, the thing that sits at the highest level of a culture will be the thing that binds us. I can't think of something that sits at a higher level of global culture. Okay, so what is going to bind us? And usually it's images of human excellence, right? We got a kind of humanism sort of loosely binding the world, right? Okay, but then what have they given us? Now, what you usually need is some kind of image that will be sincere, that will actually hold up a positive truth. Okay, so maybe you have a runner running. So you have an image of athletic excellence. Go ahead.
That's just making me think about, like, what are people going to remember? And something to me is like when Muhammad Ali lit the torch, or when it was in Greece, like the torch lighting ceremony is usually or some rendition of a song, or like those are usually seen as the thing that you remember, like the flame being lit by an arrow classically when it was in Greece, and so, but this is what's going to be remembered. This is what's going to be what is going to be remembered is something that people were divided over.
Yeah. Yeah.
At the thing that was supposed to be, how can we remember something that's supposed to be powerfully unifying, is what you're saying.
Right. And why it's not unifying, I want to try and explain how this isn't arbitrary. It's not just people being thin-skinned or easily offended or projecting their own offenses. Something we talk about a lot in this little corner in the symbolic world is that, meaning isn't arbitrary. It's manifested in the structure, the way things are. Okay, so if you have an image, a positive image of a runner running fast, or the flame, those are positive images of light or the transcendence. But what images you have here? Marie Antoinette being beheaded. You have a parody of a feast. Okay, and these are what's called death works, which is a term by Philip Rieff in his Triumph of the Therapeutic. And what he says has happened to modern culture is, in trying to get away from religion, we don't have sincere belief in anything transcendent, right? And so what happens to our art is our art becomes deconstructive and ironic. It's parasitic. It's always taking an old image that actually had meaning and twisting it or subverting it, or in some way, right? So you have the picture of Marie Antoinette being beheaded. You had an old picture of excellence in aristocracy, it would be an excellence of soul, which is the old meaning of aristocracy, going back to Aristotle, right? That someone who has excellence of soul, and that, of course, they didn't always do a great job, but the monarchy and the aristocracy were supposed to be gentlemen and ladies and to model for the world excellence of soul. And, so that would be the traditional image of what Marie Antoinette, the queen, would have been. And so we take that old image that was positive, that showed us excellency of soul, and we behead it and we cover it with, red light. And you see how that's a death work. It's not offering something positive in its own light. It's only offering us a destruction of the old. And then we can look at the image of the feast. Okay, it's kind of irrelevant whether or not it's an intentional parody of the Last Supper, right? Because the meaning of a table is not arbitrary. It is deep, right? It's deep in the human culture, because the table is that which gathers us around. It's what gathers the society around that which feeds it, right? So we share one meal, then in a sense, we are sharing one body, right? So in that image, as we're gathered around a table that's going to tell us the thing that unifies us, well, in traditional France, in the traditional West, that was the Eucharist, the image of the table, gathering around the table as our point of unity and being fed by God, and Christ being the thing that binds us. That symbolic structure is simply part of the world. And so whether or not the artist who planned a table structure to their tableau intended it to be an imitation of Da Vinci's Last Supper or not is completely irrelevant, because the symbolism of the table is real. It permeates our culture, and the meaning is going to push through regardless of the conscious intent of the creator, right? Because when we're artists, we are using the things of God's world. So we kind of pause a little bit just to explain that sacramental worldview. What that is that God, the sacramental worldview is the same thing as a symbolic worldview. And what it means is that God has made this visible material world to be an expression of, a visualization of, an embodiment of spiritual truths. And we see this in Psalm 19, the heavens declare the glory of God. Their voice goes out to the ends of the earth. Romans 1 tells us that God's eternal power and divine nature is clearly seen in the things that he has made. And so, trees have meaning that is different than grass, and onions have meaning that is different. That there are different purposes and meanings embedded into the world God has made. And what a human artist does, as Tolkien says, we are sub-creators. God has created a meaningful world, and then we as artists, made in the image of the great artist, we take the things he's made and we form our own sub-creation. But our creations are always drawing from the meaning of the things God has made. So we can't help, an artist who creates a table setting has no control over the fact that a table setting will carry through the meaning that God has made in the world. And so what have they done? They've created a table, but what is the symbolism they've put on the table? Symbols of, what's the right word I want to say? They are symbols of deconstruction. What a drag queen is the confusion of the male and the female. Images of sexual perversity. So they've taken a table setting and turned it into a death work by subverting the traditional symbols that are simply there.
The term death work, that's helpful, because then you also use the imagery of like being a parasite onto the like an original art idea, and what the image of decomposing goes along with that. And so you were saying you begin to see that in our own culture, living in the West and of the West of the United States, the end of the world, so to speak, the last frontier. And then, we're culturally, obviously, I mean, from everybody's perspective, no matter what angle you're looking at, the world's changing and has been changing now drastically. And it's funny, Jonathan Peugeot's tagline, "Symbolism happens," whether you intended it to or not. I think that's a great way to kind of say about that cultural moment, is that symbolism happened for sure. So we've talked about, you've referenced the Sacramental Worldview, symbolic world, which I happen to rep today, but which is, why is it so important in this time in history that the world is able to move out of a modern framework into a sacramental or symbolic framework to see this world? I mean, you've already hit on it, but why is it so important? Why is it maybe necessary?
Yeah, that's a good question. And maybe it can connect to one more thing I want to say about the opening, the Olympic ceremony. Why is it important that we move from a modern to a symbolic? Because the modern framework doesn't work. It doesn't fit who we are and how the world works. And so by having a defective view of the world, we are starting to fall apart, right? It's not working. And it's leading us into cultural, social decomposition. And so the renewal of a true way of looking at the world is essential for life, right? Because ideas have consequences. And I wonder if I can try and unpack that a little bit by, so there at the opening ceremonies, you have raised up into the place of celebration and unity these death works. Right. And part of why the drag queen imagery and the transgender imagery is so provocative and is because it's an image of disruption and revolution. There's, we can connect to Lewis a little bit here. In that hideous strength, there is a character named Mark who is being initiated into the NICE, and the NICE and that story represents the totalitarian regime. And part of his initiation is to spend all this time in a room that is filled with surrealist art, a room that is filled with images that are off. So that he will begin to, so basically, Lewis talks about having his imagination baptized into Christianity. This is the opposite. It's trying to deform the imagination so that the imagination will no longer expect symmetry, that the imagination will no longer expect coherence, that the imagination will no longer expect beauty. So the point of surrealist art is to break your normal perceptual expectations and values so that you will no longer value one thing over the other. Bearded woman, non-bearded woman, all the same. Bacchus on the table, Christ on the table, all the same. Trying to break your sense of normal, your sense of right and wrong, your sense of beautiful versus ugly, to disrupt. I mean, that's really what the word queer is all about. We're going to queer the West. We're going to, that word is about breaking normality, right? That's why you get normative is a slur. And so what the image of the table with all of the gathering of the queer, right? The gathering of those who have been deconstructed so that we don't have any expectations. We're breaking our sense of normality. And then, what is at the center of the table? I just want to kind of point out the inversion that's there, right? So for a world that has known Christendom, a world that has known Christ, the table is where we gather and God offers himself. So this is a demonic parody wherein what is on the table in the Bacchus, the Bacchanalian feast, it's Bacchus himself. And he's not there to offer himself. He's there to devour, to gorge himself, to glut himself, right? So rather than an image of self-giving, it's an image of devouring, of the gluttonous self. And that we humans are mimetic, right? That means that we are made to imitate what we see. And so when you lift up such a death work into the highest place of celebration, what you're doing is saying, this is something to imitate. This death work is something to imitate. This deconstruction, disruption, queering, inversion, that is something to imitate. And that leads to self-destruction, right? When we imitate Christ, the way who leads to life, we find health and life. And when we imitate the Antichrist, right, it leads to our self-destruction. Okay, so to your question, why is this important to renew a symbolic understanding of the world? I mean, one, we need to be able to read these symbols again, so that we don't play useful idiots for those who would seek to devour and destroy, right? So that if you become symbolically illiterate, right? So the modern world is very much a stripping away of symbolic understanding, taking us down to a literal, mathematical, purely rational kind of understanding. And then we forget how to read symbols anymore. And then, but we're still mimetic. We're still imitators. So what happens is we don't know how to read symbols anymore. We're illiterate. So we just go along in the world. And then these death work symbols, these twisted symbols, these distorted symbols are put in front of us. And we're going to automatically still imitate them and absorb the meaning without consciously knowing it because we've become illiterate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that 100% makes sense. And we have been, I think as a personal thing is when I was a kid and I would see like Michelangelo's or Raphael's sculptures as a kid, it didn't strike me that much because I think there was still that part of, being from the American South. I live in Arkansas. Like, there was still a lot of this ordered life in the environment. But now when I look at it, it strikes me so much more intensely because I think what we're exposed to artistically in our culture, even though I've known about it most of my life, that I don't think it's just that I'm older and more mature to interpret this art. It's like I look at it and I think that these things are screaming louder than they did 30 years ago because of the contrast in society. And that's, I guess, hopefully that's a hopeful thing. And I think that culturally, that's why there are people moving towards sacramental realities in their life and worship. And that's a lot in this space and different things that we've talked about. And I can tell you're an educator. I'm like just sitting here like at my own personal lecture right now. So it's been very, very insightful and helpful because even as I've attempted to make this more and more of my framework, your depth on that it's another level, Annie. I think that's I'm privileged to be able to sit here and have that conversation with you. So on that, there was a point, I want to shift the conversation a little bit. There was a point when you and Jonathan were talking about the Ransom trilogy, that y'all talked about laughter, and it brought up two things for me. It brought up the movie Hook by Steven Spielberg, and it brought up Joe Rogan, because y'all also talked about Merlin playing this role in society, and the laughter thing is like this line that can't remember her name's Maggie. She was in Harry Potter too as well. Anyway, she's the Wendy character, and she's saying this, that when the first baby laughed, that was when maybe I'm getting this wrong, I can't remember, but that was when the first fairy was born, and there was this like laughter connection, and then this idea that at the center of culture, that this Eric Weinstein did this episode recently with Joe Rogan, and it was a follow-up to the Terrence Howard conversation that was had, and there were so many things happening, and Eric made this statement that at this table, at Joe Rogan, at the comedian's table, he's been able to have this position in our culture to kind of point and laugh at very, very serious things, and kind of get away with it. And that's symbolically when this, and then he went on in his Jordan Peterson conversation, he went on to talk about his intense value for the for hallucinogenics. And it just kind of, as I was thinking through this Merlin imagery, that struck, I wanted to get your thoughts, if you feel like that tracks or maps onto our culture right now.
Yes. So laughter, my best way of understanding laughter is that it is our response to that which doesn't fit. Right? So we laugh when someone trips, just as a silly, somewhat unkind example, because they're not supposed to trip. They're supposed to walk.
Yeah.
Right. And a lot of humor works by pointing out the unexpected or the thing that doesn't quite fit. And this is why, some of the church fathers hypothesize that Jesus never laughed, or that God doesn't laugh, because if you're holy and perfect.
Oh no.
I think we're back. If there's perfection, then there's no source of laughter, right? However, there's something intuitively devastating to think about God never laughing, or there being no laughter as part of holiness. And I'm influenced by G.K. Chesterton, right, who had a fantastic sense of humor. And what I imagine is that the laughter of heaven, the holy laughter of heaven, is the laughter of grace. That God would love us doesn't fit, right? There's a holy incongruity that is the joyful laughter of grace. So that's just kind of my theory of laughter. Now to Joe Rogan, yeah, I think that's why in clown world, you see this, in Shakespeare a little bit, right? And like, let's say King Lear. King Lear is definitely the end of a world. It's one of his darkest tragedies. And the fool in King Lear is the only one who can speak the truth, right? Because when things are coming to an end, things are so out of joint, right? That the one who can, it's kind of the only form in which we can hear truth. I think about this in terms of, now this is the irony that some people are pointing out in terms of the Olympics sacrilegious imagery, is that at the end of a world, God made the world with meaning. You can't actually destroy the meaning that God has made in the world. And that at some point, your irony, your subversion, what it does is simply point out the truth in a negative way.
Yeah.
Almost like a film negative, where what's white is black and what's black is white, yet you can't help but see the image still.
Yep.
And this is actually that the Harry Potter books contain a lot of Christian symbolism and Christian imagery. is that I teach a class on Harry Potter. It's a lot of fun. And if you pay close attention to Voldemort and the Death Eaters, they are constantly showing a parody of Christian symbolism. And so she's actually showing us a lot of the truth in this kind of demonic inversion, right? So, so that's my understanding of the role of the Joker and the role of humor at the end of the world is the irony has reached its end. The subversion has reached its end, where it's going to flip and begin to show the fact that you can't get away from the Last Supper, and that you can't get away from these images of truth. And it's the comedian who at the bottom is the one who has the tools best able to point that out.
Yeah, it's been powerful. It's been an interesting journey to see that can start to that archetype to play out in the culture so clearly has been really cool. And I guess that helps. I mean, a lot of this space, and it's an interesting thing because, even we're getting close to like 8 years where a lot of this conversation shifted and changed largely due to also Jordan Peterson. And it's related to something very simpler. And a lot of those things had to do with protecting the speech so that we could even have this conversation, I guess, and so I think that's,
yeah, good point.
But I think it happened at such a time to where that shift began to take place, the negative, and it's not fully, been apprehended by the culture at all, but there is enough of it, I think, that it's some of that starting to make sense.
For sure. I think that's a really good point that you make about, we're realizing that we need the logos to even be able to speak at all. Right? That the conversation had so disintegrated to the point where we're in danger of not even being able to make sense, to have any meaning, to have any truth. And at that point, there's, something in the human spirit that says, wait, to speak, like, if we lose that, we lose ourselves. We better recover the ground of speech. Yeah. Right? And Jordan Peterson really powerfully there, because of his openness to the biblical tradition, pointing to the logos. And then not only, pointing that out philosophically, but living it out in his courageous willingness to speak despite the danger to himself, right? So Jordan Peterson really has been pivotal, not only in pointing it out, but living it out and giving us, again, that mimetic, right? We are made to imitate what we see. And here is Peterson acting with courage, speaking with clarity, and that rouses us to want to imitate him, to want to be courageous as well, to want to measure our words so we are speakers of truth as well. It's really powerful.
It is. And I mean, I can't help, my journey into starting a podcast and getting on YouTube. I mean, it's all downstream from that cultural phenomenon and event, really. And it was a 7-year journey towards the tagline being a place we go to think out loud, because I think I was scared to think out loud. And it's taken, and there were other things going on in my life that had to heal on a personal level, but that was definitely part of it culturally, and to find ourselves here now, and I mean, we could pull out the other cultural archetype of even Musk buying Twitter as a piece of that storyline. It feels like, but we don't have to stay there unless that's what you want to work. I kind of wanted to hit on, as we're kind of rounding things out over the next little bit here, is the state of apologetics in culture as a cultural Christian apologetic person that does apologetics, which we've done some already on here today. But because I was paying attention early when I got on YouTube in the late aughts, that was a lot of what I was consuming, because I, as a person, let's see, I was, 25 in 2010. And And I was looking, Dawkins' God Delusion had just come out like a year or two before. And so when I got on the YouTube space and all the conversations that were happening around apologetics were still this kind of classic argumentation, that, I think it served a type of purpose, and it was a type of war, actually. I guess it was that was happening culturally, and then or spiritually,
Yeah.
and then with, it kind of goes back to me. It goes back to that point where when Jordan sat down with Sam Harris, the conversation almost changed in an instant with how a conversation about is there a God or is there not a God, when Brett Weinstein moderated with them those Pangburn series. I'm just wondering if that's something that you have thought too, and then we both sounded like when we bumped into each other on Twitter, watched Peter Boghossian, who's an atheist, have this conversation with Jonathan Pajot, trying to bridge this symbolic meaning in their conversation. So I don't know your perspective on what's transpired in the last decade and a half or so.
Yeah. I think one shift that happened, an important shift, is, and Justin Brierley, I don't know if you've listened to his series, and it's excellent. He's just done a great job tracking with the story of how the apologetic landscape has shifted over the last 20 to 30 years. And I do think it has to do a lot with the arrival of sort of the woke ideology, and then the rational atheists realizing they don't have the tools to deal with it. And that exposing, experientially the weaknesses of their framework, and then causing them to, perhaps be a little nostalgic for the days when they just fought Christians, because Christians were nicer people generally, right, than some of these woke ideologues. So I think that's a significant shift. And, one way I understand that shift is, and this relates to the Boghossian interview, because I think I tweeted, that podcast wherein Jonathan Pajot tries to explain that the fact value split isn't actually real. So the fact value split is something I know through Francis Schaeffer, so apologist in the 70s. And he talks about how what happens in modernism is that, modern materialism reduces everything to what he calls the lower story, the story of just material facts, things are measurable. And the upper story is the story of what is subjective.
Got you paused here.
My internet, I'm sorry, it paused a little bit. So the upper story being, imagination and a sense of self and consciousness and all those things that you can't measure. And so you've got the upper story and the lower story. And for your modern materialist, the lower story is the only thing that's actually real. Molecules in motion and things we can know through science. And the upper story of values being something we project, or that's socially constructed, or that's emergent, but not truly objectively real. So I think the problem, so that was sort of the modern, I call this like modern dualism. And the problem is that, how do those fit together? This is the fact value split. Okay, if I just have material facts, this is a jacket. How do I fit the material facts with the world of values, what I ought to do, what I want to do, what I perceive as important? And there's no way to, in a modern rationalist framework, fit those together. Now, in the Christian framework, that's the sacramental framework. That's the symbolic framework that says, and it really does function through teleology.
Yep.
That created purposes are what integrates meaning and body, right? Divine purposes. What I see is that having rejected incarnational Christianity and a sacramental worldview, and a teleological worldview. We all rejected that as superstitious and obstructive to science, okay? And having got rid of that, we had no way to integrate our world. And that's why critical theory or wokeism had such a powerful traction, is that it came along and said, I can tell you how to integrate things in meaning. It's all about power structures, right? Why, what is the meaning of the statues in our society? Well, it's white colonizers who wanted to control the poor and the minorities and institute structures, a superstructure that would secure their hegemony. That's the explanation for the integration between value and meaning and things. It's a power structure. Does that make sense?
Yes. Yeah, it does. I mean, well, I'm familiar with that, why that narrative. I'm very familiar with that narrative. I guess what's the symbolic narrative of why we have statues and why we have monuments from our culture. I think from my perspective, I'm going to guess, but it helps us develop our myth.
Yeah.
That's our and even back to the beginning of our conversation, it develops a unifying myth. So
yes.
Anyway, I guess that's
sorry, it cut out again there for a second. So I think that rational atheism was swimming along, but there was a vacuum of meaning, and that vacuum of meaning created a context in which this woke ideology could flood in and say, this is why things are. This is the meaning of our country. This is the meaning of what you experience. Michelle Obama, this is why someone cut in front of you in line, right? It's an integration principle. So rather than an incarnational principle of love, the love that moves the spheres, the love of God that infuses his art, his creation with meaning, the integration principle is power. It's the lust for power that structures our world and gives things meaning. And atheists didn't have a response to that.
Yeah, they didn't know. And because into the Tom Holland thesis, because they took the water that they were swimming in for granted.
Yes.
Yeah, we all did, I guess.
Right. And so I think what that's done is create, it's softened the antagonisms between atheists or agnostics and Christians, those who share, right? So now we have something higher than our disagreements that we can share, is a concern about this cultural social problem. And so that shared concern gives us a better sense of charity.
Purpose. Oh yeah,
for one another, right, upon which to have our conversations. And I think that then the atheists and agnostics are genuinely asking, well, why is maybe there's something maybe there's something metaphorically true but literally false that's still worth understanding or trying to better work with, and that's opened up different kinds of conversations, and conversations that, rather than arguing at the level of like syllogistic argument, conversations that are working at the level of meaning.
That is interesting to me, because there's like this whole line of to Justin Brierley's The Surprising Rebirth and Belief in God. The stats aren't maybe pointing to that as part of a certain part of that story, but if you look at a certain segment of influential people online within a certain kind of relationality, you do see that shift. And I mean, the names that were popping up, of course, the relationship with Boghossian is James Lindsay has a completely different conversation, the enemy of my enemy is my friend type thing. And then obviously the Russell Brand thing, but just this complete softening. And it was funny listening to Rogan and Peterson talk about Dawkins, and because I was like, Rogan, 5 minutes ago, you were a materialist. Like, you know, like, and now it's, oh yeah, this, you know, and but to say that shift hasn't taken place is obviously real. And I think that, you know, when people, sometimes whenever, what's the rationale? What's the Alex O'Connor, when he points to statistics in the kind of, in a, you know, in the discussions between whether anything's happening or not, without acknowledging that it's happening among the influential, the culture will follow certain parts of that, but it's going to be, you know, 3-5 years, like when that stuff starts showing up in statistics or something. But I think, and it's an interesting time though, that conversation, like you said, because when the points that jumped out at me as this conversation was changing, I'll never forget when Brett Weinstein gave the illustration of the porcupine with that, you know, well, maybe it's not literally or actually true religion, but it believing that porcupines can shoot quills is keeps you safe from something, even though they don't shoot quills. And I remember that, just like, that was a huge moment for me. I was like, well, you're giving credence to something that for almost a whole time when I'm listening to anybody that's evolutionarily, biologically, you know, attuned, that they don't want to give any credence to anything at the expense of losing any ground to their argument. And that was, I don't know, that's when there started to be some kind of like you said, like realizing there was something here that we're looking for, that we need. And I've seen that conversation change. And then the conversation between Boghossian and Peugeot, it did. I mean, I'd be interested if you thought, like, it seemed like he was trying and at points being able to maintain a posture of curiosity towards, you know, the framework that Peugeot was trying to get him to understand. Because he would go back, now you've got to walk me back through this again. You know, I don't know. Did you think that it was charitable in that way, that there was a curiosity coming from him?
Yes, I think there was a curiosity. I'm not sure how genuinely open.
Sure.
Like how open, how far that curiosity extended. But far enough. And I think this is what's important for us all who are part of these conversations in this world to remember, is that people grow slowly and minds change slowly. And I like to often think about the growth of a tree. You know, if you try to bend that branch too fast, it will break. And you know, since I teach great books and I teach ancient, medieval, and modern, I'm always thinking about the whole sweep of history. And we are in a pivotal moment in the sweep of history. Yet still to remember that those moments move slowly, right? If you turn the Titanic too fast, it'll sink. And so that if your goal for a single conversation is just to understand one step further of someone's worldview, that's a good and fruitful goal. And so I think often in these conversations, you know, we want Jordan to convert, or we want, you know, this person to have an epiphany. The first time they talk to Jonathan Pajot, you know, that's just not the way people work. There's many, you know, our worldview and the way that we perceive and understand, the way our mind structures our experiences and our narrative, you know, those things take a while to build. And they take a while to shift. And, you know, the Christendom, the Christian sacramental worldview, you know, emerged as Athens met Jerusalem, and the medieval ages contemplated and developed an understanding of what God has revealed. And, you know, the modern era, I pin it around the time of nominalism. I mean, that's 500, 600 years ago. Modernism, the shift toward modernism, you know, not only nominalism, but also, you know, the age of exploration, our exposure to so many different cultures, the technological changes, huge part of that narrative, right? Because we understand our world through metaphors. And when we move from an organic metaphor, the Aristotelian metaphor of organism for understanding ourselves, and we move to a metaphor of machine, I mean, that epistemology, that imaginative change was huge and has taken several hundred years to percolate through our culture and the way that we think about ourselves and the way that we structure our societies. These processes have been going on for hundreds of years. I truly believe we're at a turning point, that the modern era has ended already, is dead, is, rotting corpse, if you will, and that we are moving into, I don't know what the next era is to call it. I like to call it a neo-medieval era, an era where that sacramental understanding is reborn in some form. But it's going to take so much time. And so if we can have patience with each other, it is exciting how much is happening. It feels like we're living inside of a myth being enacted, right? I mean, that the past few weeks, right, have been, just think even the past few years, the pandemic, the near assassination of the presidential candidate, this symbolic moment at the Olympics. We are definitely living in a pivot point, but if we can have that long-term perspective and give ourselves some gracious spaciousness to have modest hopes for our conversations, I think that will help us do a lot, contribute positively towards the shift, rather than in rush and anxiety, create as many new problems or tensions as we might resolve.
It makes me think of two things. One, if I can hold on to them, Tolkien's vivid imagery of the machine of war, like, that he was so tapped into that spirit of beauty versus this machine. And we're, his was in the portrayed the machine of war, and we're in this now, the machine of mind, as we enter into that. And the other piece is, and I'd be interested to hear you give your perspective. I've talked to two other people, John Heers and Matt Hylam, who were at Symbolic World, and just kind of the, Vesper Stamper's charge at the end. Like, what are we doing? What is the path for creating things to help people see, usher in, encourage the world into sacred realities, sacramental realities. And well, to that other point is I like how you're using these levels of where things landed spatially, because I think that the other piece that the world has forgotten is the idea of what it means to behold something as sacred, or to consecrate something, to make something with sacredness. And so I don't know, there's a couple of things to bounce back at you as we kind of are rounding things out today.
Yes. This is one reason I love That Hideous Strength, and I talk about it all the time. It's because it's a story about the cosmic war, the battle between heaven and hell unfolding on this little planet. And you've got angels warring with techno-humanist humans, and it's this overwhelming apocalyptic landscape. And what does Lewis really point at for us to do? Love your spouse. Also love your spouse, have children, make a good meal, gather at the table, read good stories, laugh, go to church. The fundamental human things, that the cosmic battle, and this is part of, man being a microcosm of the macrocosm. And that's part of this wondrous mystery that we live in, that somehow, when we wrap up this podcast, I'm going to go in and make dinner. I'm going to excuse me for tearing up a little bit, but by loving my husband and making a place for my children to gather and to talk with one another about their day and to reflect on the meaning of the world and to have a garden where there's a fig tree growing figs and the rose tree growing a rose, and to know my neighbor's name so that when he's sick, I can take him food. That's how we heal, because really that's the fact value split, the upper lower story split. It's the rending of heaven and earth. It's the tearing apart of our spirit and our body, which is the technical definition of death, right? And so how do we heal the cosmic battle, the rift between heaven and earth? By bringing them back together in our own lives, right? And part of that, the very center of that, the anchor, are the sacraments of gathering around the Eucharist table, where we're fed with the divine food, where the broader community gathers, and then, the sacrament of marriage. Whether you're married or not, you're part of a family, and that family gathers around the table of the home as well. And to keep those gathering points where heaven and earth meet sacred, and to sustain them with as much beauty, goodness, and truth as you can, that's how you participate in the renewal of the world. And I really believe everything else flows out from there.
That's a beautiful word. And I think that it's one that we can end things on today. So Annie, you have anniecrawford.net. People, and you've written for Symbolic World, and I'll put all the links in the description. Is there anything specific you want to point people to related to your work?
Goodness, what do I have going on right now? I would just point out for any perhaps women out there who enjoy the life of the mind and who enjoy, this little corner and intellectual spaces can be a little bit more male dominated, and there's nothing wrong with that. But I know for myself and for other women that we also enjoy the chance to meet women who like to talk about Plato and debate ideas, which is why we started the Society for Women of Letters. So it's great to chat with our male friends. Sometimes it's also good to, pursue intellectual friendship with other women. So if you're at all interested in that, please go to the Society for Women of Letters and check us out.
It was definitely easier to find guys to start having conversations with, and I had to kind of started to have conversations with the feminine, and it was important though to start doing that. And I think but to that point, the different spaces are kind of have their own teleology, so to speak, and so creating that space for the feminine, I think, is beautiful. So everybody, Annie Crawford, information and links. And what was the name of that the group that you just talked about for women?
I know, it's kind of a tongue twister, isn't it? Society for Women of Letters.
Society for Women of Letters. All right. Well, thanks again, Annie. And we'll hang around and we'll end this thing real quick backstage, okay?
All right. Thanks, Christian.
Hey, everyone. Thanks so much for tuning in and staying with us until the end of today's episode. Your support and digital connection are truly meaningful to me. If you've enjoyed today's conversation and believe that these discussions bring real value to your life, please consider liking the video and subscribing to the channel. I'd also love to hear your thoughts, so leave a comment below and let's keep the conversation going. Your feedback and interaction are crucial in making this space even more meaningful. Also, I've opened up channel memberships on YouTube. By joining, we can foster a stronger community of connection and support the continuation of more conversation craft. Membership is set up to foster this in 3 ways. Level 1, connect via members-only community posts for channel feedback, behind-the-scenes moments, and supportive membership branding on comments. In addition, Level 2, get to watch podcasts a week before they air, along with other unique members-only videos. At Level 3, join scheduled monthly focused small group discussions with other kindred spirits from all over the world. Thank you again for being a part of this journey. Together, we can cultivate meaningful, supportive digital community right here in this little corner of the internet. We'll see you next time.